The morning air hung heavy with the scent of pine and desperation. In the heart of what would one day become the northeastern woodlands of America, a small band of indigenous hunters prepared for what they knew might be their final hunt, before winter's merciless grip tightened around their throats. The year was somewhere in the mists of 1491, and for the woodland people, as they called themselves, survival had become a mathematical equation written in blood and bone. 16-year-old Aiyana crouched beside her father, Dakota, watching as he checked his bowstring for the 100th time that morning. His weathered hands trembled, not from cold, but from the weight of what today demanded. Around them, 11 other hunters made their final preparations, each carrying the same burden that had settled over their village like a death shroud. They had exactly one day to prove their worth, or watch their families starve through the coming winter. The hunting expectation was not merely tradition, it was survival incarnate, a cruel god that demanded sacrifice and offered no mercy for the weak-hearted. For generations, the woodland people had lived by its unforgiving rules. Every able-bodied hunter must contribute significantly to the winter stores during the final hunt, or face banishment from the tribe. Those who failed would be cast out into the wilderness, taking with them only what they could carry, leaving behind families, children, and elderly who would then have to survive on reduced rations. But this year was different. This year, the hunting expectation had evolved into something more sinister, more desperate. 3 consecutive seasons of poor harvests, combined with the increasing scarcity of game, had pushed the tribe to the edge of extinction. The elders had made a decision that chilled the blood of even the most hardened warriors. This year's hunt would not just determine banishment, it would determine who lived and who died. Dakota's eyes met his daughter's, and in that moment, she saw the terrible truth he had been hiding. Her younger brother, Chaitan, lay dying in their lodge from a wasting sickness that had claimed 4 other children in recent weeks. The boy needed medicine, rare herbs that grew only in the deep forest, far beyond the designated hunting grounds. To gather these herbs would mean abandoning the hunt. To abandon the hunt would mean failing the expectation. To fail the expectation would mean death for not just Chaitan, but for Aiyana and her mother as well. As the hunting party moved deeper into the forest, following the tracks of what appeared to be a small herd of white-tailed deer, Aiyana felt the crushing weight of the hunting expectation settling over her like a burial shroud. Every step forward was a step away from saving her brother. Every arrow nocked was another moment of his life slipping away. The expectation whispered its cold logic. Save 1, lose 3. Follow your heart, doom your family. The forest around them seemed to echo with the voices of ancestors who had faced similar choices. In the rustling of leaves, she could hear the cries of children who had died because their parents chose compassion over necessity. In the cracking of branches underfoot, she heard the bones of hunters who had been banished for showing mercy at the wrong moment. The hunting expectation was not just a contemporary demand. It was the accumulated weight of centuries of survival decisions, each one carving deeper channels of acceptable cruelty into the collective soul of her people. But as they moved deeper into the shadows between the trees, Aiyana began to notice details that others had missed. The deer tracks they were following showed signs of panic, of animals fleeing not just from human hunters but from something else. Broken branches hung at unusual angles, suggesting that whatever had frightened the deer had come from the direction they were now heading. Most disturbing of all, she began to recognize the metallic scent that spoke of blood spilled recently and in significant quantities. The other hunters, focused entirely on the promise of meat and the demands of the hunting expectation, pushed forward without acknowledging these warning signs. Their desperation had made them blind to dangers that would have stopped them under normal circumstances. The expectation itself had become a form of madness, driving them toward goals without regard for wisdom or safety. The first rehook came when the hunters discovered something that changed everything. The deer tracks led to a small clearing where a mother doe lay dying, her leg caught in what appeared to be an old trap left by rival hunters from the northern territories. Beside her, a young fawn stood guard, refusing to leave its mother's side despite the approaching danger. Here was an easy kill. Here was meat that would satisfy the hunting expectation without effort, without risk. The wounded doe could not escape. The loyal fawn would not abandon her. 2 lives that could save 12 families from starvation. The mathematics of survival had never been more clear. Dakota raised his bow, arrow nocked and ready. Around him, the other hunters did the same, their faces masks of grim determination. This was what the hunting expectation demanded, the ability to kill without hesitation, to prioritize the tribe's survival over individual compassion, to become instruments of necessity rather than beings capable of mercy. But as Dakota drew back his bowstring, Aiyana saw something that made her blood freeze. In the dying doe's eyes was the same look she had seen in her brother's face, the desperate, pleading awareness of impending death combined with fierce love for offspring that would soon be left defenseless. The fawn's unwavering loyalty mirrored her own desperate desire to save Chayton, regardless of the cost. The hunting expectation had created a perfect moral trap. To show mercy to the animals would mean failing the tribe. To kill them would mean becoming the kind of person who could destroy innocent love for the sake of survival. Either choice carried a death sentence, either for the family or for the soul. What happened next would haunt Aiyana for the rest of her life. As she watched her father's fingers begin to release the bowstring, she made a decision that defied everything the hunting expectation stood for. She stepped directly into his line of fire, her arms spread wide, protecting the mother and fawn with her own body. "Father, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible but carrying the weight of generational wisdom. "If we become killers of innocence, what separates us from the winter itself?" The standoff lasted only seconds, but in those moments, the entire foundation of the woodland people's survival philosophy cracked like ice in spring thaw. Around them, 11 other hunters lowered their weapons, not in support of Aiyana's compassion, but in confusion about what the hunting expectation truly demanded in this moment. Dakota's arrow remained nocked, his bow half-drawn, as he stared at his daughter with a mixture of pride and terror. Here was the second cruel twist of the hunting expectation. It had created a situation where mercy itself became an act of rebellion, where compassion was indistinguishable from betrayal. But the doe made the choice for them. As if understanding the moral complexity of her situation, she used her remaining strength to push herself upright, her wounded leg barely supporting her weight. With desperate determination, she began to limp away from the clearing, her fawn following closely behind. She was choosing to die on her own terms, in her own time, rather than become the instrument of someone else's moral destruction. The hunters could have easily pursued and killed her. She was wounded, slow, defenseless. The hunting expectation screamed at them to follow, to complete what survival demanded. But something had fundamentally changed in that clearing. The expectation itself had been wounded, its absolute authority challenged by a 16-year-old girl who dared to suggest that some prices were too high to pay, even for survival. As the doe and fawn disappeared into the deeper woods, Dakota slowly lowered his bow. Around him, the other hunters began to murmur among themselves, their voices carrying undertones of both admiration and fear. They had witnessed something unprecedented. The hunting expectation had been defied, and the world had not immediately ended. But the day was far from over, and the most terrible test still awaited them. The hunting party split into 2 groups. 7 hunters, led by the village's most experienced tracker, continued pursuing the deer herd deeper into the forest. Their faces were set with grim determination. They would not return empty-handed, regardless of what moral victories had been won in the clearing. Dakota, Aiyana, and 4 others found themselves following a different path entirely. As if guided by forces beyond their understanding, they began tracking signs that led away from the designated hunting grounds and toward the deep forest where the healing herbs grew, the same herbs that could save Chaitan's life. The hunting expectation roared its fury at this decision. Every step away from the primary hunt was a step toward failure, toward banishment, toward the slow death that awaited those who could not provide for their families. The expectation had been clear for generations. Personal needs must never supersede tribal survival. Individual love must never triumph over collective necessity. As they moved deeper into unmarked territory, Dakota began to tell his daughter something that would redefine her understanding of their people's history. 23 years earlier, during his own first hunt, he had faced a similar choice. A rival hunter from their own tribe had fallen into a pit trap and broken his leg. Dakota could have rescued him, but doing so would have meant abandoning a crucial tracking opportunity that could have fed his entire extended family. He had chosen survival over compassion. He had left the hunter to die and pursued the game. When he returned 3 days later with enough meat to last his family through winter, he found the hunter's body where he had left him. The man had died not from his wounds, but from exposure and dehydration, a slow, agonizing death that could have been prevented with a moment of mercy. The hunting expectation told me I had made the right choice, Dakota said as they climbed through increasingly dense underbrush. My family survived. The tribe was fed. The mathematics of survival declared me victorious. But every day since then, I have carried the weight of that man's death, and I have wondered if survival purchased with such cruelty is truly survival at all. This revelation cast the day's events in an entirely new light. The hunting expectation was not just a survival mechanism, it was a moral cancer that had been eating away at the soul of the woodland people for generations. It had created a culture where compassion was weakness, where mercy was betrayal, where the very qualities that made them human were seen as threats to their survival. As they reached the grove where the healing herbs grew, Aiyana realized that they were not just gathering medicine for her brother. They were performing an act of rebellion against a system that had convinced them that love was a luxury they could not afford. Every plant they gathered was a declaration that some things were worth more than survival, that some prices were too high to pay even for life itself. But the hunting expectation was not finished with them yet. As they filled their gathering bags with the precious herbs, they heard sounds that made their blood turn to ice. The howling of wolves, close and getting closer. A large pack had picked up their scent and was moving in for the kill. Here was the expectation's final, cruelest test. They were far from help, outnumbered, and carrying precious medicine that could save a dying child. They could drop the herbs and run, possibly escaping with their lives but ensuring Chaitan's death. They could stand and fight, likely dying but protecting the medicine that represented their choice of compassion over survival. Or they could try to hide, risking both the medicine and their lives in a desperate gamble. As the wolf howls grew closer, Dakota made a decision that redefined the hunting expectation forever. Instead of choosing between survival and compassion, he chose to integrate them. Using knowledge passed down through generations, he began to create a smoke signal, not to call for rescue, but to communicate with the wolves themselves. The woodland people had ancient treaties with the wolf packs, agreements that predated the cruel mathematics of the hunting expectation. These treaties were based not on domination or fear, but on mutual respect and understanding. The smoke signal carried a message. We are not prey. We are not enemies. We are fellow hunters in search of healing, not harm. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary wildlife encounter in the history of the woodland people. The wolf pack, led by an ancient alpha female with scars across her muzzle, emerged from the underbrush and approached the small group of humans. But instead of attacking, she performed a behavior that left even Dakota speechless. She laid down in a gesture of respect, then led her pack away from the herb grove. The alpha female's eyes met Dakota's for a long moment, and in that exchange, something profound passed between human and wolf. This was no ordinary animal, but a creature whose own pack had faced the same terrible choices that now confronted the woodland people. The scars on her muzzle told stories of battles fought not just for territory or food, but for the right to protect her young against threats that demanded the sacrifice of everything she valued. As the wolf pack moved away, each member stopping to acknowledge the humans before disappearing into the forest, Aiyana realized that they had just witnessed a demonstration of the very principles that the hunting expectation had tried to destroy. The wolves could have easily killed them all and claimed both the herb grove and the humans as prey. Instead, they had chosen to recognize the humans' peaceful intent and their desperate need for healing medicine. This was the ancient wisdom that predated the hunting expectation, the understanding that true strength lay not in the ability to dominate every situation, but in the wisdom to recognize when cooperation served survival better than competition. The wolves had shown them that even in the natural world, the cruelest tests of survival often demanded not violence, but the courage to choose mercy when mercy was warranted. As the wolf pack disappeared into the forest, Aiyana understood that they had just witnessed the true spirit of their ancestors, a spirit that the hunting expectation had slowly corrupted over generations of fear and scarcity. The original woodland people had not been cruel calculators of survival mathematics. They had been part of a complex web of relationships that included not just humans, but all the creatures of the forest. The hunting expectation had taught them to see themselves as separate from and superior to the natural world. It had convinced them that their survival required the destruction of everything around them. But the wolves had just reminded them of an older, deeper truth. Their survival was most secure when they recognized their place as part of something larger than themselves. Racing back toward their village as the sun began to set, the small group carried more than healing herbs. They carried the seeds of a revolution that would challenge everything the woodland people believed about survival, compassion, and the price of being human. When they arrived at the village, they found chaos waiting for them. The main hunting party had returned with devastating news. They had successfully tracked and killed the deer herd, but in doing so, they had discovered something that changed everything about their understanding of the hunting expectation's true cost. The scene that greeted them was one of celebration turned to horror. Families had gathered to welcome the returning hunters, children had prepared songs of gratitude, and elders had built fires for the feast that would celebrate another successful defense against winter's hunger. But the hunters who emerged from the forest carried faces marked not with triumph, but with a profound sense of loss that they could barely comprehend. The lead hunter, a man named Alan who had served the hunting expectation faithfully for more than 2 decades, stood before the assembled village with tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. In his hands, he carried not just the evidence of a successful hunt, but proof of something that challenged everything they believed about the mathematics of survival. The deer they had slaughtered were not just any deer. They were the last remaining herd in the entire region, the final survivors of what had once been a thriving population that had sustained the woodland people for generations beyond memory. Hidden among their kills, the hunters had discovered the bodies of several older deer that had died not from human arrows, but from starvation and disease. Evidence that the ecosystem itself was collapsing under the pressure of the hunting expectation's relentless demands. But the most heartbreaking discovery came when they found the remains of what had once been a sacred grove, a place where their ancestors had made offerings to ensure the continued abundance of game. The grove had been destroyed not by enemies or natural disasters, but by their own people, following the hunting expectation's demand to extract maximum resources regardless of long-term consequences. The sacred trees had been cut down for weapon making. The soil had been stripped for its medicinal plants, and the streams had been diverted for temporary advantages in tracking game. Here was the expectation's ultimate revelation. Its brutal mathematics were not just morally corrupting, they were strategically suicidal. By demanding immediate results, regardless of long-term consequences, the expectation had been gradually destroying the ecosystem that sustained the woodland people. Every successful hunt that followed its merciless logic brought them one step closer to complete ecological collapse. As Aiyana knelt beside her brother's bedside, administering the herbs that would save his life, she realized that the hunting expectation had been dying all day, killed not by mercy but by its own inability to see beyond the immediate crisis. The doe and fawn they had spared in the morning might be the only breeding pair left in the region. The wolves, who had shown them respect rather than hostility, represented a sustainable relationship with the natural world. The herbs that would heal Chaitan grew in groves that could only survive if humans understood their role as guardians rather than exploiters. But the most profound change came as the village elders gathered to hear the reports from both hunting parties. For the first time in generations, they were forced to confront the possibility that the hunting expectation itself had become their greatest enemy, a tradition that had outlived its usefulness and was now actively threatening their survival. The debate that followed lasted 3 days and 3 nights. Some elders argued that abandoning the hunting expectation would mean abandoning discipline, strength, and the harsh realities that had kept their people alive for countless generations. Others began to see that the expectation had become a prison that prevented them from adapting to changing circumstances. Aiyana found herself at the center of this debate, no longer a child but a symbol of a new way of thinking about survival. When called upon to defend her actions in the clearing, she spoke words that would echo through generations. The hunting expectation taught us to see compassion as weakness, but I have learned that our greatest strength lies not in our ability to kill without feeling, but in our ability to feel without losing our wisdom. The doe and her fawn showed us that love and loyalty are not luxuries. They are the forces that make survival meaningful. Her words sparked a revolution in thinking that went far beyond hunting strategies. The woodland people began to question not just how they gathered food, but how they raised their children, how they treated their elderly, how they related to neighboring tribes, and how they understood their relationship with the natural world. The hunting expectation did not die easily. For months after that crucial day, it continued to exert its influence through the fears and habits of people who had known no other way of thinking about survival. Some villagers argued that Aiyana's compassion had been a luxury they could only afford because the other hunters had succeeded in their kills. Others worried that abandoning the expectation's harsh discipline would lead to laziness, weakness, and eventual extinction. But gradually, a new understanding began to emerge. The woodland people started to develop what they called the hunting wisdom, a philosophy that combined the expectation's emphasis on providing for the tribe with a deeper understanding of sustainability, compassion, and long-term thinking. Instead of demanding immediate results regardless of consequences, the hunting wisdom emphasized the importance of understanding complex relationships, making decisions based on multiple generations rather than single seasons, and recognizing that true strength came from the ability to show mercy when mercy was appropriate. The doe and fawn that had been spared became symbols of this new philosophy. Hunters reported seeing them throughout the following seasons, not just surviving, but thriving, eventually producing offspring that helped replenish the deer population in the region. The wolves, who had shown respect rather than aggression, became partners in maintaining the balance of the forest ecosystem. The herbs that had saved Chaitan's life were cultivated and protected, ensuring that future generations would have access to healing as well as hunting. But perhaps the most important change was in how the woodland people understood the relationship between individual love and collective survival. The hunting expectation had taught them to see these as opposing forces, requiring them to choose between caring for loved ones and caring for the tribe. The hunting wisdom revealed that individual compassion and collective survival were actually complementary forces, that a tribe was strongest when its members were able to love deeply while thinking clearly, to show mercy while maintaining discipline, to feel deeply while acting wisely. Aiyana grew up to become one of the most respected leaders in the history of the woodland people, not because she had rejected the importance of providing for the tribe, but because she had found a way to integrate compassion with responsibility. Her brother, Chaitan, saved by the herbs gathered during that crucial day, became a master healer who developed a new understanding of how human health was connected to the health of the entire forest ecosystem. Dakota lived to see his daughter's wisdom transform not just their own tribe, but their relationships with neighboring peoples. The hunting wisdom spread from village to village, carried by hunters who had learned that true strength came not from the ability to kill without feeling, but from the ability to feel without losing effectiveness. The story of the day compassion became a death sentence, became a teaching tale passed down through generations. But its lesson was more complex than simple moralizing about the importance of mercy. It taught that survival itself could become a prison if pursued without wisdom, that tradition could become tyranny if never questioned, and that the greatest threats to a people's future often came disguised as their most sacred survival strategies. Years later, when European explorers first encountered the descendants of the woodland people, they found not a primitive society ruled by brutal survival mathematics, but a sophisticated culture that had learned to integrate practical necessity with moral wisdom, immediate needs with long-term thinking, individual love with collective responsibility. The hunting expectation had died that day in 1491, killed not by weakness or naivety, but by a 16-year-old girl who understood that some deaths lead to resurrection, some failures lead to greater success, and some acts of compassion create strength rather than weakness. In choosing mercy over mathematics, love over logic, feeling over fear, she had discovered that the cruelest test of survival is often learning when survival itself has become the enemy of life. The last words of this tale belong to Aiyana herself, spoken decades later as she watched her own grandchildren prepare for their first hunt. The greatest danger any people face is not starvation, not enemies, not natural disasters, but the moment when their survival strategies become more important than the life they are trying to preserve. When keeping alive becomes more important than being truly alive. When surviving becomes more important than living with honor. When avoiding death becomes more important than embracing what makes life worth living. That is when a people begin to die even as their bodies continue breathing. The hunting expectation had demanded that they choose between compassion and survival. The hunting wisdom taught them that true survival required both.